One more completed atonement.
In Flanders fields the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved. And now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.
Remember the usual shilling, like, comment, subscribe, share. Can you improve on a masterpiece? That is a question that sometimes flies in the head of people. How can I make this better? And for the first expansion of Dawn of War, it seems that the developers at Relic had the same question. After the first Dawn of War saga was done, this expansion would be eclipsed by the second, Dark Crusade, and the third, Soulstorm. Dark Crusade for how good it was, and Soulstorm for how much you need a mod to play it properly. But still, this first expansion deserves to be talked about because it is a hidden gem when it comes to RTS games and expansions. And it also gave us a pretty decent meal. Without further delay, let's begin. Released in 2005, Winter Assault was the first expansion to the critically acclaimed real-time strategy game Dawn of War. Developed by Relic Entertainment and published by THQ, this expansion brings a host of new content to the original game, including one new faction, new units, new maps, and a brand new campaign. One of the biggest draws of Winter Assault is the addition of one new faction, the Imperial Guard. The Imperial Guard is a massive infantry-focused army that can field vast numbers of troops at once. They lack the heavy firepower of some other factions like Space Marines, but make up for it with their sheer resilience and adaptability. They are a difficult faction to master, but in the hands of a skilled player, they can be incredibly effective. Winter Assault also introduces a number of new units for each faction, as well as new upgrades and abilities. The Imperial Guard, for example, gains access to new heavy weapons themes, as well as powerful new tanks and artillery pieces. The Eldar, for another example, gains access to new types of infantry and vehicles, as well as powerful psychic abilities that can turn the tide of the battle. In addition to the new faction and units, Winter Assault also introduces a number of new multiplayer maps, as well as a new game mode called Assault, which challenges players to capture and hold strategic points on the battlefield. This mod adds a new layer of strategy to multiplayer matches and is a welcome addition to the game. With that said, let's look at the gameplay. Winter Assault follows the same gameplay mechanics as the first game, not expanding that much compared to its predecessor, with players taking control of one of the 5 factions, each with their own unique structures and units. The game is a real-time strategy game where players must gather resources, build structures, and train their units to defeat the enemies. Like in the previous entry, the resources are gathered through capture points and the units are made in squads. One of the main additions to the gameplay in Winter Assault is, as I mentioned before, the Imperial Guard, who are technically a more traditional army-style faction, relying heavily on ranged units and artillery, and not at all on the melee. The addition of the Imperial Guard faction adds a new layer of strategy to the game, and mostly for Imperial Guard players because they are weaker in close combat, and they have a wide variety of ranged units and artillery pieces, which can decimate enemy forces from a distance. A good aspect of Winter Assault is the improved AI. The AI in the first game could be predictable, easy to exploit, and easy in general. But in Winter Assault, the AI is more intelligent, making battles more challenging and rewarding, and the campaign much harder. One problem with Winter Assault is that it doesn't deviate too much from the gameplay mechanics of the first game. While the addition of the new faction is a welcome change, the core gameplay loop remains the same, and it can feel like more of the same for those who played the original game. Another issue is that some of the new units and structures feel unbalanced. The Imperial Guard's artillery, for example, can be devastating to enemy units, and can feel like a bit of an unfair advantage, especially in multiplayer matches. Another downside of Winter Assault is that it suffers from a few issues that held it back from being perfect. One of the most notable one was the one mentioned above, balance issues plaguing the game. Because again, while the Imperial Guard are an interesting addition and they have artillery units that can blast everything, that made them overpowered compared to other factions, especially thanks to their long-range weaponry and their tanks, making them a little bit difficult to counter. They used to dominate matches, and they still probably will as long as you know what you're doing. This made multiplayer matches, of course, feel unbalanced and unfair when you had to fight an opponent that knew what he was doing. And of course, understandable, some players will feel frustrated when facing off against the Imperial Guard unit. Remember how I said the AI was one of the best things about this expansion? Well, the AI now feels more frustrating and inconsistent than in the original game. Don't get me wrong, the AI got smarter, way more intelligent than it was before, and much harder and challenging, to the point where it feels, as I've mentioned, unfair. But it sometimes had moments where it was just sending random units on suicide missions, or just have them stand there while under attack, which was a little bit annoying if you include the advancements in AI and how this kind of served in a way to overcompensate for how good it was. It is a little bit balanced out, if you will. The developers made several improvements to the game's mechanics. Of course, we got new upgrades for structures and units that would make them more effective in battle, thanks to an increase in armor, range, or damage. The multiplayer aspect, on the other hand, was also improved, with the addition of new maps and modes. The game now features a wider variety of maps and game modes, which gives players more options to customize their matches, even though the gameplay loop might feel the same as it did in the previous game. Winter Assault built upon the already solid gameplay foundation laid by the first Dawn of War. One of the most significant changes was the addition of course, the Imperial Guard, the fifth playable race, who is a human army that relies heavily on ranged weapons, I've already mentioned this, with their infantry being armed with las guns, their tanks armed with heavy cannons, and having interesting names like the Baneblade or the Le Man Russe, and their artillery capable of firing devastating barrages from afar, though not being Kriegsmen. The addition of this faction added a new level of strategic depth to the game, as players can now experiment with a different army composition and tactics, both to learn a faction that will be too strong in multiplayer matches and how to counter it. Another significant improvement was the inclusion of a new single-player campaign. This time around, players were able to play as one of 4 factions, each with their own unique storylines that intertwined with one another, split in a good and bad campaign, much like the Battle for Middle-earth games. The campaign was a little bit longer, I would say, and more complex than the one in the base game, with more intricate mission objectives and a greater emphasis on the story and character development. This of course added a new layer of immersion to the game and made it feel like a fully fledged experience rather than just a collection of missions. The base building and resource management mechanics remained largely the same as in the original, with a few minor tweaks and improvements. But largely, as mentioned before, the game remained the same for a good duration of its time. Now, the story part. Screw that, I'll talk about graphics and sound. Or pretty much the same as in the first game. The story is then. It will get a bit complex and weird, but hear me out, it will be okay. As mentioned, the story is split into Forces of Order and Forces of Disorder campaign. Good and evil. Each of this is split into two. For the Order faction, we have Eldar and Imperial Guard. And for the Disorder faction, we have Orcs and Chaos. Fitting, I know. And this is as best as I can prepare you for what is to come. In the Forces of Order campaign, the player takes on the role of a Acadian shock trooper regiment of the Imperial Guard, with occasional allied assistance from the Space Marines of the Ultramarine chapter, and the Eldar. The 412th Acadian Regiment participated in the Imperial campaign on Lorne 5 under the command of General Stern. General Stern and the 412th Regiment land on Lorne 5, an ice world ruled by Chaos Space Marines from the World Eaters Traitor Legion warband known as the Blood Legion of Khorne, and the indigenous orcs led by the warboss Gorguts. They intend to assist the Ultramarines already on Lorne 5 to get a crew from the Collegia Titanica to recover the Imperator-class Titan Dominatus, a massive and powerful humanoid war engine from the times of the Horus Heresy that is powerful enough to win any conflict by itself. Built in ancient times over 10,000 standard years before, the construction of an Emperor Titan is an enormous undertaking, requiring the efforts of many Forge Worlds and any Titans found in the wider galaxy left from the days of the Horus Heresy are treasured as relics of the Imperium. Though the Imperial Guard's beachhead hits a wall, literally, trying to retake the planetary defense fortress from the forces of chaos, the Eldar of Craftworld Ulthui secretly assist the regiment and disable the gate, preventing their progress. Eventually, the troops of the regiment rescue the Ultramarines and the Titan crew, and begins the long trek to reach the disabled Titan. The Ulthui Eldar, led by Farseer Taldir, do everything in their power to make sure their presence remains unknown. But when an orc megboy with unique technology capable of sensing their teleportation appears, they are forced to reveal their presence, destroying the orcs and teleporting away. Too badly damaged to accomplish their original goals following their combat with the orcs, Taldir is forced to reveal herself and openly ask Stern for assistance. Stern agrees, good guy, and the orcs are pushed back. In the aftermath of the combat against the Greenskins, Taldir reveals that she does not care about recovering the Titan, but instead her goal was the destruction of the Necrons, who hibernate underneath the planet's frozen surface. For Lorne 5 is also a Necron tomb world. Over 6 million standard years before, the ancient Xenos species known as the Necrons had chosen to hibernate deep beneath their tomb worlds across the galaxy for millions of years, and now they are awakening. Taldir explained that she could not allow the Necrons to escape from Lorne 5, but if they do, they will cause untold damage to the surrounding star systems, and potentially to her own craft world, before being stopped. The two factions ally, but both know their goals are mutually exclusive. And at this point, you, as the player, get to do the final choice. Will you side with the Eldar, or with the Imperial Guard? Luckily, this is the story segment, and we will be showing you everything regarding this. If you choose to go with the Imperial Guard, General Stern assists the Ultramarines in getting the Titan's crew past the uneasy alliance of orcs and the World Eaters warband on Lorne 5 into the safety of a waiting psychic shield, preventing their enemies from following them directly to the Titan. However, Taldir and her Eldar are trapped with the orcs and the traitor marines of the Blood Legion, and she tells Stern behind the shield that he cannot defeat the Necrons without her. However, Stern laughs off her prediction with the typical Imperial arrogance shown toward Xenos. Silly Xenos, you are never right. As he will not risk his men for hers. Stern and the Cadian regiment march on to their goal, while the Eldar are butchered a few feet away from them by the traitor Marines and the Greenskins. Upon reaching the Titan, the Orc World Eaters Alliance, known as the Forces of Disorder, descends on the Imperial encampment protecting the Titan. Their crew begins to work, but they require a massive amount of energy to power up the Titan's ancient systems, and Stern is forced to protect the Titan. Several plasma generators, including a nearby Imperial encampment of survivors from the Orcs and the World Eaters. Although the Titan is too badly damaged to move until extensive repairs can be carried out, its now operational weapons easily dispatch the Orcs and the World Eaters. However, the massive release of power causes the Necrons to fully awaken, and they proceed to butcher the remaining forces of the Orc World Eaters Alliance. No more forces of disorder, it seems. Beginning their slow march to destroy the only living souls left, the Imperials, they nearly succeed before the Titan's new crew is able to destroy the Necron monolith using the Titan's weapons. Ultimately, the Cadian regiment and the Ultramarines are successful in repairing the Titan, destroying the Orc World Eaters Alliance, and destroying the Necrons before they escaped from the planet. But at the cost of Farseer Taldir and her Eldar. This fact in no way bothers Stern or his Ultramarine allies, who believe the Eldar to be untrustworthy Xenos. And for most cases, they would be right. But that is the story of the Imperial Guard. If you decide to pick the silly Xenos, the Eldar, Taldir uses the distraction caused by the Works and the World Eaters attack on the Imperial Guard and the Ultramarines to teleport her buildings, troops, and Soulstone past the Psychic Shield. The Ultramarines are slaughtered, but Stern and much of the Imperial Guard regiment manage to escape the horde of Orcs and Chaos Space Marines. Unlike the Imperial Guard campaign, Taldir does not fight the forces of disorder when she reaches the Titan. The Imperial Guard has surrounded her, but the Necrons awaken and begin trying to kill the Eldar. Remember, there's a huge vendetta between the two factions, and the Necrons don't forget. Taldir uses the Soul Stone and sneaks past the shield to destroy an awakened Necron monolith. But too many more appear before the Soul Stone can recharge. Desperate for a weapon to use, she decides to power up the, I quote, primitive but still powerful weapons of the Titan surrounding her, able to jury-rig a solution since she does not have a Titan crew. She also manages to convince Stern that he can have the Titan once the Necrons are defeated, thus once again gaining the humans as allies. And Taldir will use the Titan's weaponry to utterly defeat the Necrons. Although successful in destroying the Necrons of Lorne 5 and gaining a momentary victory over the Necron war machines across the galaxy, of course, Taldir's unfamiliarity with the Titan weapons system causes them to explode, destroying the Dominatus. Bye-bye, Emperor-class Titan. She and her Eldar manage to teleport away in time, but the fate of Stern and his men is left unknown, while the fate of the Titan is pretty clear-cut. Now let's move to the Evo campaign, the Campaign of Disorder. The Campaign of Disorder begins with the Orc war boss Gorguts Id Unta. that was a weird one, trying to unite the Orc boys on Lorne 5 under his control. With Gorguts' starting force, he launches attacks against the Head Crushers, Rokitagrads, Burna Boys, and Quickmechs clans, destroying their big banners and uniting them under his rule. His force is eventually stopped by the shielded gate of the Foot Stompers' fortress, whereupon he promptly destroys the generators feeding the power to the gate. He soon discovers the Squigots are loose in the Foot Stompers' base. After freeing the Foot Stompers' Mad Dog from the holding pen, he brings the Squigots and the Foot Stompers under his control. Afterwards, he attacks a remote outpost on the world belonging to the World Eaters' warband known as the Blood Legion of Khorne, which is led by the Chaos Lord Cruel. Gorguts, to take his newly unified war across the icy planet, flies to some unknown destination, but is shot down by the World Eater's anti-aircraft battery. Gorgut survives, and the Chaos Lord Cruel seeks to slay the green-skinned chieftain. Cruel soon meets Gorguts' remaining orcs, while they are launching an assault, or multiple assaults, on his temples of Khorne. While trying to kill Gorguts, Cruel realizes the orc chieftain is surrounded by a shield, making him invulnerable. Cruel soon sets out to destroy the orc base nearby, and also the orc power generator feeding the shield of Gorguts. After Cruel's Chaos Space Marines successfully destroy the orc base and the generator, Gorgut launches a massive assault on the chaotic forces, but Cruel promptly returns and puts an end to the orc chieftain. Gorgut is dead, but before Cruel can savor his victory, an artillery barrage unleashed by the Cadian 412th Regiment begins on the location. Gorgut suddenly springs up. As it turned out, he was just playing dead. Cruel expects the Orc Chieftain's forces to aid him in defeating the Imperials, but Gorgut flatly refuses and escapes to rouse his boys and kill the Yumis himself. After Gorgut escapes, he gathers his war and assaults the Imperial Guard regiment's base, killing the Imperial General Stern, taking his head as a trophy, and enraging Cruel by saying that his head will be the next trophy that Gorgut takes. Cruel, however, finds out about the existence of the Emperor Titan Dominatus, and is determined to use it to destroy his enemies and become an even more powerful force among the forces of Chaos. To do this, he summons Chaos Sorcerers from the Eye of Terror to gather blood from local Imperial forces to appease Krone, his chosen Chaos God. At this time, the Eldar force from Craftrol Ultwi, led by Farseer Taldir, appears to Cruel's base and attacks it, continually launching assaults throughout the mission. When Cruel gathers enough blood, the Eldar summon an Avatar of Cain, a manifestation of their own god of war, to overwhelm the chaotic forces' base. Cruel is forced to use the blood gathered to summon a Bloodthirster, a powerful greater demon of Khorne, and defeat the Eldar. However, Cruel uses too much of the sacrificial blood summoning the Bloodthirster, and is forced to gather more later. However, he learns Gorgut is amassing his forces near the Titan. Fearful for the safety of his great prize, Cruel decides to confront Gorgut and put an end to the irksome greenskin. It is here where the path splits for the forces of the disorder. You get to pick between the World Eaters and the Orcs. Let's see what happens if you pick Chaos. Cruel and his World Eater Space Marines, Chaos Space Marines, fall upon the Ultramarine convoy transporting the Titan crew, killing all the Imperials they find. The chaotic forces then proceed to butcher their way through the remaining Imperials, the Psychic Gate, which they then open for long enough to get their men and vehicles through, before sealing it shut on the orcs. As the orcs desperately try to breach it, Krul taunts Gorguts with the knowledge that he only spared the orcs' life so he could fight the Imperials and the Eldar, thus saving Krul the trouble of doing so. Krul remarks to Gorguts, "You've been a good dog, now die." Furious that their war is at an end, the orcs turn on Gorguts, who narrowly fights his way out from his own enraged greenskin followers. However, with no one to lead them, the orcs no longer possess a threat as they revert to their usual fratricidal ways. Krul and his men establish a base near the downed Titan and re-erect their sacrificial pit dedicated to the Blood God. While fending off attacks from the last few Imperial outposts, corrupted Psykers under Krul's control capture Imperial Guardsmen and bring them back to the base to be sacrifices to the Blood God. But as Krul acquires enough blood, the Necrons finally awaken. Knowing he can't stop them, but now possessing the full favor of Khorne, Krul orders his sorcerers to possess the Titan using a demon spirit, bringing its weapons under his command. With the power of the Titan, the Necrons and surviving Imperials are annihilated. Delighted with his victory, Krul prepares to rebuild the Titan and then take his war across the galaxy. He vows to his troops that what will come next is no longer war. It is endless sacrifice in his name. Blood for the Blood God. Let the universe drown in it. If you couldn't tell, I think this one is the proper ending for the forces of this order. But I am starting to become a World Eaters fanboy recently, so you can excuse that as my biases. Next, you get to pick to play as the orcs. Gorguts and his boys smash their way through Ultwi Eldar forces in the city, killing the Farseer Taldir, and they reach the Psychic Gate before the Chaos Lord Krul, cutting the power to it to allow them entry. A desperate battle ensues between the orcs and the Chaos Space Marines. Krul sneers Gorguts won't know how to use the Titan, but Gorguts retorts he plans to destroy it, since it's of no use to him. Mortified at this potential loss of such a powerful weapon, Krul launches a full attack on the gate, forcing his way through. Gorguts and the orcs establish a base near the Titan, and a brutal three-way battle begins between the orcs, the Chaos Space Marines of the Blood Legion of Khorne, and, surprisingly, the last few Imperial survivors from the Ultramarines and the 412 Cadian Regiment. Several of the Titan's weapons are destroyed, and the Imperials are wiped out, but the orcs keep fighting. Even the awakening of the Necrons, who are quickly wiped out before they can fully deploy their weapons by the sheer number of the orcs, prove only a momentary distraction. The orcs finally fight their way to the main chaotic base, and after they destroy Krul's army, Gorguts and Krul face off in a final duel. Gorguts kills Krul and cuts off the Chaos Lord's head to serve as his latest trophy, just as he had promised. In the aftermath of this victory, Gorguts seems satisfied by what his war achieved on Loren 5, but wonders where can he find another world to fight on. Now, you might be wondering, since 40k has canon, which is the canonical ending for the game? Well, as detailed and established by the Dark Crusade, the second expansion for Dawn of War, the following events we know took place for certain. Farseer Taldir of Craftworld Ultui survives the events on Lorne 5 as she leads the Eldar in the Dark Crusade campaign, suggesting that she was successful in reaching the Titan before the Imperial Guard. She dies in all the other faction storylines. Oyabu Gorguts Ed Unta lives to fight another day. Literally, he can be seen in the Dark Crusade leading the Orcs again. Gorguts was forced to retreat from Lorne 5 by the Imperial Guard, but not before killing Lord Cruel and taking his skull with him. The Chaos Lord Cruel's skull was taken by Gorguts and can be retrieved in the Dark Crusade campaign, given to the word-bearer Dark Apostle, Eliphas, the Inheritor, should he be successful in the campaign. Should the Eldar defeat the Imperial Guard in Dark Crusade, the narrator states that Farseer Taldir was branded an enemy of the Imperium after her manipulation of the Cadian 412 Regiment on Lorne 5. General Lucas Alexander's regiment was ordered to pursue the Eldar across the galaxy, and that this long chase was finally over when they faced off at Victory Bay on Kronos. Conversely, if Governor Milton Lucas Alexander defeats the Eldar in the Dark Crusade campaign, the narrator states that his original mission was at an end, suggesting that his original primary mission was to hunt down Farseer Taldir for treachery on Lorne 5. His new mission of liberating Kronos from the Tau Empire was only given after discovering the Hellstorm cannon at Victory Bay. So from this, it seems one ending from both campaign is true. A combination of the Eldar and Orc endings as mentioned above. Taldir escapes from Lorne 5 to continue her mission to stymie the awakening Necrons, much to the surprise of the Imperial Guard, who sent General Lucas Alexander to question her and her involvement in the Lorne 5 conflict, thus following her to Kronos. Gorguts possessed the skull of Lord Cruel, meaning the two finally faced off in the final Orc mission before Gorguts was forced to retreat and leave Lorne 5. However, Gorguts was unable to reach the Titan as Taldir arrived at the crash site first. If we move from here and look to the books, because Dawn of War has books, in the book Dawn of War Tempest, we get an account from the protagonist of the last game, Captain Gabriel Angelos of the Bloodraven Space Marines. He arrives at Lorne 5 to find that the Imperial Guard were victorious and had begun to repair the Titan Dominatus. It is also mentioned that Taldir survived the massacre, however, badly wounded and taken prisoner by the Imperials. It is therefore possible that the Imperials won, Gorguts killed Cruel, and that Taldir escaped and was hunted down by Lucas Alexander, eventually catching up with her during the Dark Crusade campaign. This seems, in my opinion, as the best canonical ending. And this is the story. With a story like this, the replayability of the game is even greater than the original, and it only adds to the strength of Winter Assault. But let's get into some praises of the game. Winter Assault is an underrated hidden gem that deserves recognition as the masterpiece of real-time strategy gaming. Despite being an expansion to the original game, Winter Assault manages to stand on its own as a unique and impressive experience that improves on its predecessor in many ways. One of the most impressive aspects of the game is its storytelling. Winter Assault features all these engaging characters and plot twists that keep the player invested throughout the campaign. The game's campaign is well placed, with each mission building on the previous one, and the plot thickening as the game progresses, and you get to make that final choice. Of course, as you saw, the game is split into 4 acts, each with its own unique storyline and objectives, and ending which is dubious. But this structure allows for a satisfying narrative arc that keeps the player engaged from start to finish. In terms of gameplay, Winter Assault builds on the solid foundation of the original Dawn of War. The game retains the core mechanics of base building and resource management, while adding new units, abilities, upgrades, and a new faction. This allows for greater strategic depth and variety in gameplay, as players experiment with different units, compositions, and tactics. I would say, one of the most impressive improvements over the original game is the AI. As much as the computer-controlled opponents are smarter and more challenging and annoying sometimes, this makes the gameplay experience more satisfying in a way, even if it is at certain points a chore. And it is mostly because the AI can effectively counter your strategies and adapt to changing situations, forcing you to constantly adjust not only your tactics but your plans and your approach to battles. And I think this helps in a way as much as the diverging paths in the story and the way it's told. I think these things unify Winter Assault and make it a hidden gem, while indeed it pales in comparison to its following expansion, Dark Crusade. I think Winter Assault deserves the title of Patrician Game, the same title given to the first Dawn of War. And hey, things can only go up from here. Or so they say. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next one.